Hello class, for exercise 2 this week, I want you to select a single object to draw at life-size scale on the white homework paper. And you're going to be using the graphite pencils for this, so you're going to need at least a 2B pencil. It'll be helpful if you have a darker shade of lead as well, such as 4B, 6B, or 8B for the shading part of this exercise. So the first thing you're going to do is set up a strong light source for your object. I've chosen the stuffed animal, and the light source is creating strong shadows and bright, obvious highlights. That's what you're looking for this exercise, because there will be a shading component. At first, though, you're going to be exploring more measuring and working on your line work. And then after that is complete, then I will have you shade half of your object. So all of these same measuring rules I've covered earlier, or measuring techniques, can be applied here, but you'll be using the 2B pencil. So I just want to start out by saying that before you get started, use very light pressure when you're doing your initial line work. All of your first lines should change. And so for that reason, you should use the lightest possible pressure you can while still making a visible mark in order to get that preliminary line work. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is measure the height of my object to its width, and they are equal pretty much. His little petals come out a little bit more, but I can confidently place him on the page that way as well. And so I'm going to create a mark just to say how tall he is. I can actually get close enough to my object to actually place that measurement down on the page. Don't pick an object that's too large or too small. Something that you can draw life size comfortably, such as a teapot sized object or a shoe, is ideal. So now I've got 2 marks here. I want to know what's happening at the center of my object. So if I bring my fingers together at a regular rate, I should get a rough estimate of the middle, and that's cutting through his ears. So right now I'm tracing in the air, creating an imaginary line, imagining what's a line at that half point, and his ears are there. So if I do the same thing here, roughly the half points here, and so I place the ears lightly. Okay, so then once I have my ears down, now I can just get started with placing everything else. So right now I'm looking at the negative space behind the ears to get this front leg, and I'm looking at the angles. Gone down a little bit below my line, that's okay. I think I went a little small. Now I'm looking at the negative space shape under that mouth. Coming up. Go back. So here, and I know that it's difficult to see the light lines, so try to use a little bit more pressure. But right here, I am drawing the preliminary lines for the bottom of this leg. And so if I'm happy with this at the bottom, and I don't want the rest of my drawing to reach any lower than that, and I am, so I we'll start here then as an anchoring point. And if I come up a bit, look at the negative space shape, the back leg is visible, peeking out from behind from where I'm sitting. So I'm going to get that there. I'm making the mental note that the shoulder behind the ear goes up above that back leg. So I'll make sure that that's happening. There's sort of a flower petal here. I'm looking at the negative space shape, the triangle, and I'm looking at the angles that this triangle makes. I guess from your vantage point, you're seeing this triangle and that one. So you can actually look at the shape of the negative space in the air to help get proper proportions. So now I'm getting my leaf in, and I'm making the mental note that this green leaf comes out further than anything else. So I need to make sure that it's doing that in my drawing. So that looks good. And I can actually measure that negative space shape, how much the leaf is protruding past the back leg. And it is, I'm locking my elbow, closing one eye, and pinching in the air to get that measurement. So that measurement, I can apply it to somewhere else, it's the same as the height of the ear. So this space here, if I'm happy with how that looks, should be sort of the space of this ear. So I think that this leg can come in a bit. So that's closer to what I'm seeing now. So make sure to erase your incorrect lines. So that was a pretty big adjustment. Okay. So then this petal, even though it's the same shape as this one, it's foreshortened. So the angle it's turned, so we see much less of it. And then I'm just going to draw something roughly for this little crown shape. And my subject expanded a bit here, but that's okay. So I'm roughly getting that petal in and checking it against the ear. The angle of my ear was off there. So then there's this leaf that's coming out here. There's a bit of a negative space shape. You can see means this petal can come out over here a bit. You can see that the petal comes out past this ear a bit. This ear is a little longer than the other ear. Yeah, that's happening in my drawing. Okay. So then I'm going to start doing a couple other measurements. So now that I've roughly got this flower thing placed, I'm going to measure the height from the bottom of this pink petal here, to the top of the flower crown. And how many of those measurements is the lower body? So it's about 1.5 to the bottom of that leg. So 1.5. So that means I can raise this leg a bit. Okay, so now that I'm confident that that's placed decently, I can get this mouth in. You never want to commit to too much detail too fast, because all these proportions should change as you continue to measure. And so if you go too quickly into detail, it's just a waste of time. So here I'm going to check based on my vantage point, is this triangle, is this angle of his mouth, is it aiming down or up? So it looks actually like it's aiming down. Make sure that that's happening. It's just a very slight angle. So I wouldn't go into too much detail, say with the teeth, because I'm not happy yet with this mouth. There's way too much of this lip showing, for example. Okay, so I'm going to measure the mouth, top of the mouth is the same measurement basically from the bottom of this chin to the tip of the snout. It's the same measurement almost to the distance to the leaf. So I'm going to make sure that that lines up, and it does. So I'm okay with the leaf being here and the bottom of the mouth being here. They relate proportionally. Okay. So then I can place this nostril. And sometimes it's useful to check what's at the center. So I'm going to check from my view what's at the center is the nostril's a bit to the right. So I'm just going to make sure that my view, the nostril's a bit to the right as well. There's a bit of another visible nostril over there. Now let's place this eye. So I'm going to transition to actually using this eye as a finer measuring place once I'm happy with this eye. This eye will be useful for measurements like the width of the mouth, it's the same exact measurement. The width of the petal, it's the same measurement. The height of the eye is the width of the red triangle. So you always want to, when you're measuring, you want to be looking at areas that are of similar dimension, or if it looks like maybe it's something like half of the height of the eye is maybe half of that paw. Yeah, 2 of those eye measurements go into the paw. So I just try to look for measurements that will give me useful information so that the different parts of the drawing can relate. Here at this eye, I might check Are these the same thickness? Yeah, they look pretty similar. So I'm going to shrink the differences a bit. Then I can check the width of the eye. How many eye width distances? 1, 2. Is it before we get to the next eye to place the next eye? So 1, 2. It's a little bit more than 2 eye widths. 1, 2. So I think we can place this eye here. And another thing you can check is where things line up. So if we make an imaginary line from the end of our ear tip down, it's actually cutting through that eyeball. So my eye might be a little too far, or my ear is not far enough. So that's the thing when you're measuring, you can always change what you're measuring with or what you're measuring against. So since I'm happy with this ear, I'm going to take this ear as a measurement to help place the other ear to answer my question. So it's about 1 ear width over before we start seeing the other ear. So this ear can come in a bit to here, and then this leaf needs to shrink a bit. Then that means just want to make sure that this ear stays shorter than the other one because we made that measurement before. Look at the angle of this, the bottom of that ear. And I erase the lines as I go, just so that I'm not confused by the old lines. Okay, so I'm just gonna roughly place that inner triangle of the ear. This one, I just made the mental note that that distance was thicker than this one. So I just want to make sure to leave that thicker distance. Okay, so now that I'm a little happier with where this ear is, I can use that actually to help me place this eye now. So I'm actually going to look from my vantage point, how much of his face am I seeing next to that eye? It's about 1 eye width over. So where does this eye end? Imaginary vertical line. It cuts right through the ear here. So I'm going to replace this eye. Does it line up with this one? No, it's a little higher. So start it about here. And now I can relate it to the leaf. What does this negative space shape look like? And it looks similar. So all that measuring helps us place that eye. I know it's round, but we're actually seeing the eye a bit in foreshortening, so it's not going to be perfectly round. So I'm actually going to trace in the air to get the right curve because it's not a perfect circle. Okay. Going to trace in the air to get that angle correct. Pupil in. Okay. So something's looking a little wonky, the relationship between this eye and this eye to me. So just want to some clarity. Okay, I'm just going to double check where's the lowest point of this leaf in regards to this eye, and it actually stops here based on where I'm sitting. Okay, so I can bring this all up. So I want you focusing first on lines. I'm going to check now if I'm happy with this ear. The leaf starts visually cutting over it here. Okay, and then there's a bit of the back of the body creeping out. And then this paw comes in. We've got our occlusion shadow down here. It's placed okay. So one thing that's throwing off this drawing a bit is I haven't added the shadows yet, and the shadows give us more information about the form of what we're looking at than the line work can sometimes. Just fixing some of these angles that I think are off. Gonna move this nostril down. This is a good measurement to take. I'm going to check this little space against the eye. So lastly, I'm just going to get the line work in roughly of this leaf up here. And as usual, I have to rush a bit with these demos so you guys can get to drawing. You would continue measuring until this just refines more and more and more. So once you're happy enough with the line work, and this is okay for just what I'm going to demo for you guys, then I want you to shade a portion of your image. You can choose if it's going to be sort of, a whole half of the image. I'm just going to start shading where I think it's most interesting or necessary to shade this. And then I'll let that inform what my half is. So I'm going to start going in because it's been bugging me that the mouth is so dark, but my drawing isn't communicating that space. So I'm going to put this, fix the mouth and refine that and begin to add shading. I'm going to start shading with the 2B I've been using for line work, and then I will transition it to the 8B that I have to finish the darkest parts of my shading. So I'm going to just look very carefully to make a kind of final call for this right now, this portion of him. Then place this out. And then to place this fang, I'm seeing, I'm noticing it's to the right of the eye. So I'm going to make sure that the fang in the right place. So the fang's in the right place. And now I'm going to just press a little bit to darken behind it. And then I'm going to adjust the contour of the mouth. This originally is coming up a little too high. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. And never be complacent with the lines you've drawn. You always want to be making changes even when you get to the shading. So now I'm going to place the other teeth, and they're falling in an imaginary vertical line, one directly here. And then the next one cuts here. So I checked it against the eye. And remember, something's only the correct proportion or the incorrect proportion based on what else is in the drawing. So that's why you want to be comparing different parts of the drawing to itself so that they all make sense next to each other and as pieces of each other. So I don't want to lose that tooth, so I'm just going to erase it out. If you like to have more control while drawing, you can load a mechanical pencil with 2B grade lead actually, and that gives you a ton of control. So this portion of the mouth that gets pretty dark, I'm just going to use the side of my pencil and fill it in a bit. I'm looking at how low this goes if I need to adjust that line work. So I think I'll probably draw mostly this, shade this half. So this nostril's all wonky, so I really want to adjust this line to be more correct now that this mouth is. I'm going to erase that nostril, it's off. Okay. And it's not uniformly dark within the mouth. So now I'm looking at this thickness of the mouth. One of the darkest areas is over here in this corner where I'm currently shading. I'm gonna make sure to press really hard, put in. Looking at this space, see mine is way too narrow. That means I've gone too low. Still too low, but I can actually bring this part of the mouth down more to compensate. Now that seems to be the correct distance from the mouth, the height. So I got to bring these teeth down a bit. Then I'm gonna create a line just to denote this jump from the red to the pink fabric. And the red fabric is darker. So the mouth is beginning to push back a bit in space. And I'm just going to take my paper towel to bring some of this drawing material out. So I showed earlier how to set a ground on an entire sheet of paper, but sometimes it makes sense to set a ground just within the contours of what you're drawing. And so that's something I want you to try for this drawing. So I just use some of that material that I placed in the mouth to add some shadow to the rest to work with. Now this will let me erase for some of my lighter moments too. So there's a light catching on the edge of the mouth that I'm going to try to capture. And now I'm actually going to go in with the 8B after I redraw these teeth. So it's really important that you guys are matching the darkness of what you're seeing. So I want to try to match the darkness of what I'm seeing in the mouth, which is one of the darkest places. So I've got an 8B, which is a lot softer and will go a lot darker. So I'm ready to commit to this line now, much more than I was before. Remember, we want to avoid heavy contour lines, and so you can really blend it out, the lines that you draw. So as I'm drawing this, I made the mental note that even though the teeth are technically white, the tooth that I just rendered is in shadow, and so it's got to be a little darker than the other ones. Now I'm coming in the 8B to add the appropriate darkness here. Confident that this line can go here. I'm just going to use my finger now. If you have blending stumps, those can help work the material into the page too and spread it and blend. If you end up with texture in your paper, sometimes you actually have to add more drawing material. So I'm going in with the 8B more in order to kind of even out the texture, and then you can erase up whole sections. That will sometimes remove the texture. And if you noticed, I went from going more generally in this drawing to going more specifically. So next, I'm just gonna carve out some more of these shadows on this side of the farm. And the 8B is going to look a little different than the 2B, so it's important to incorporate it if you use the darker leads into other parts of the drawing, so it's not just awkwardly in one place and your viewers like, why is that one area of the drawing like shiny or looking different than the rest? That goes for if you ever want to use mixed media for a drawing, such as incorporating something like glitter or glow in the dark paint or gold leaf. It's important not to just have it appear in one awkward place. You should make sure that it integrates with the rest of the composition and the rest of the materials. So it's important to me that you guys practice going dark enough. And if you're still having a hard time seeing if you're going dark enough or not, I recommend downloading a picture of a value scale or using the value scale that you guys created and holding it up to what you're drawing and then holding it up to your drawing itself to see if they match. Especially your darkest and your lightest areas. I like to, when I start shading, I like to kind of resolve an area that's my darkest area. That's what I did with the mouth. And then I like to place something that stands in for one of my lightest moments, just so I understand what range I should be drawing in for the rest of the values. So here I'm noticing that there's a shadow on the top of its ear. Lay down some graphite. Remember to really limit what becomes absolute white on this. In this drawing, absolute white, I think I would restrict to over here, the very lightest moments. So I noticed that there's some shadows that are not present yet up at the top of the head. So I'm going to add some more material up here. Just. If you use the side of the graphite pencil, it will lay down material quicker and more efficiently. And it also can help to not get the texture on the page. Pay close attention to the edges of your form and get some practice blending to transition from your highlights to your shadow areas. So I just made the mental note that it's white where the white of the eye is. And so I need to communicate that in the drawing. So in order to do that, I'm going to make the choice to darken everything around that area. And I'm angling my strokes here while I'm shading to help support the form a bit. It just is an efficient way to draw. So once that's there, I'm gonna erase up a little bit just to make this obviously lighter. And then I'm gonna go in with my 8B to deepen all the darkest moments that need to communicate that they are the darkest moments. Right now, all of these moments that are obviously just line need to go away. These don't, because they're actually stitched. So but it's just that needs to be clear in the drawing that the viewer is looking at stitching. So I just made the mental note, inside this triangle, everything is darker. So it's important that I show that in the drawing. So the last thing I want to do is I just want to sharpen a bit of the edges. And so sometimes you actually need to bring the drawing material out a little further than you know the form goes. And then sometimes it's the eraser that makes the sharpest edge, especially if you're going to leave the white of the page for something like this. So then with very firm pressure, I'm going to look at my subject and sharpen that line. It's easier with the graphite pencil to create a sharp line just by being careful, not to touch or draw over the line. That's what I just did there. Okay, so yeah, I would continue to just refine if I were to keep working on this. And like I mentioned before, you always want to be willing to readjust your contours as well. So remember, you don't have to shade the whole form, just pick a portion, about half of the image. If I were to keep working on this, I would just continue the shading up into the top portion, and I would add more details and refine and attempt to sharpen. A good way to work is to ask yourself, is this area flat? That's how I would continue to proceed. I just asked myself that on the ear. Does this look flat in the drawing? And yes, it did. So then I checked on the ear, does the ear look flat? When I look at it, no, it doesn't. And the reason why is there's this bit of highlight above the red part, and then there's shadow that it blends into that shows us that the top of the ear is in shadow. So the last thing I'm going to do is just communicate that. So I want to be careful not to draw into this erased out area, because that's the highlight. Then need to go in with the 8B. So that begins to communicate that space a little bit better.